Hello, this is Ajarn John here, and today I'm going to answer this essay question. Do you think it is possible for people with different religious beliefs to live side by side in peace? With different religious beliefs. Religious, R-E-L-I-G-I-O-U-S. In the picture you can see a Catholic church which is situated deep in a soy not far from my home. This was first built over 400 years ago by Portuguese and Cambodian immigrants, and is one example of religions coexisting side by side. Thailand is mostly a Buddhist country, but there doesn't seem to be much problem with having a Christian church here. We can see throughout history, and especially nowadays, there is a great deal of conflict in regard to religion and different religious ideas, particularly in regard to radical Islam. We can see all kinds of conflict, very ugly violence, to conflict over things like women's rights in countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia. Women in these countries may not be allowed to drive a car, to walk in public, and are forced to wear certain kinds of clothing. Personally, I think it is quite difficult for religions to live side by side, but it does depend upon how strict and fundamental the religion is. Buddhism is probably one of the most unassertive religions, and I think is tolerant of most other religions around, but Islam doesn't seem to be, at least in its most radical forms. And we can also see areas of conflict between different kinds of Christianity, for example in Northern Ireland. So my own answer to this question is religions can only coexist peacefully to the extent to which they can think rationally in a secular way. Secular, S-E-C-U-L-A-R. What I mean by that is they can make choices outside of their religious beliefs. For example, with young children in school, rationally we might say, well, children should be allowed to choose what religion they want to study because they are new into this world and have the right to make these decisions. However, their parents may say, no, that's not so, they must follow the religion that we follow. So we then can get into the question about governments who make the rules for a country. Should they be secular? In the Western world, I think mostly people think governments should be secular, although we often hear presidents and prime ministers evoking God to support their actions, especially so in America, I think, which still has a fairly strong Christian foundation. In Islamic countries, though, such as Iran and Saudi Arabia, the law and the government is not secular. It is based upon some kind of Muslim principles. So by definition, if you live in one of those countries, your freedom is restricted to accord with the principles of Islam. So as you can see, this is not an easy question to answer. That's why we have so much violent conflict around the world. But for the purpose of the essay, we want to find a fairly simple answer to enable us to demonstrate high quality English. So we don't want to get too involved in trying to give the best answer. So let's start with the essay. Paragraph 1, the introduction. We can clearly see around the world that it is not easy for religions to coexist peacefully. Especially in recent times, there have been terrible atrocities committed by radical Islamists. For example, there was the recent massacre of university students in Kenya, I think, and daily on the internet we can see people being murdered and tortured in the name of this religion. So that's good enough for the introduction. Now, second paragraph, I'm going to choose to support the idea that religions can coexist peacefully, and I'm going to refer to the one central idea of what I will call secular rationality. I'm not going to get too involved with the different ways in which this question can be answered, but for paragraph 2, which is going to be the body of the essay, we want to try to keep it simple. I am going to try to think of some ways in which secular rational thinking can enable people with different religious beliefs to get on together. So let's begin. I think if people are capable of thinking in a non-religious way, in particular in a rational way, then we can get on together and solve our conflicts. Religious ideas will create conflicts because of different ways of behaving people are expected to follow. But if we can all agree upon a way outside of religious beliefs, then there's no reason why we cannot work together in a positive and successful way. For example, in my office I have a Muslim friend who sits near me. She wears traditional Islamic dress and also fasts F-A-S-T-S, during the month of Ramadan. However, this does not interfere with the way she works. She still works efficiently and is able to communicate with everybody, and we all get along fine. Here I'm going to introduce the past perfect tense, which I always try to do during the example story. I remember during last Ramadan she had been fasting for about 1 week, and I could clearly see she was tired and a little irritable. So to make things easier on her, I decided to have my lunch outside rather than at my desk as I normally did. Although I do not follow the principles of Islam and don't see the necessity to fast, I was willing to accept and understand her behavior, and I think this helped to make us all able to work well together. Furthermore, according to her beliefs, she has to pray several times per day, so our office manager kindly provided a prayer room. Actually, it's only a storeroom where she takes her prayer mats, so it hardly involves any inconvenience for the department. So I think you can see that with a little bit of mutual understanding and clear thinking, we can get on well together. Now move on to paragraph 3. Paragraph 3 only needs to be quite short, just to give the opposite point of view that maybe religions cannot get on together. On the other hand, when religions are too strict and rigid, then it can be very difficult for them to coexist. Christians, for example, in Muslim countries have to be very careful to keep a low profile, and there have been many reports in recent years of Christians being evicted from their homes, killed or injured. Clearly, this is happening in countries where rational thinking is not the usual modus operandi. Modus operandi. M-O-D-U-S-O-P-E-R-A-N-D-I. Some people may just say M-O. And you will often hear this in American detective movies. The detective may talk about the killer and ask what's his M.O. What's his M.O. meaning what is his usual method. Now last paragraph, conclusion. In conclusion, I think it is possible for religions to get on together to the extent that they can think rationally in a secular way. However, we can see clearly that in many parts of the world this really is not possible. So that concludes the essay. Notice I have tried to answer the question by just using one or two examples of how religion can affect people's behavior, talking about Ramadan and the way women have to dress in Islam, for example. So this is a method you should use in essay questions. Try to find a simple way to answer the question, then go into the example in more detail, and try to use the past perfect tense in the example. One area I didn't mention earlier was the problem, I think, about spirituality. The problem with many people who have religious beliefs is they will say their belief is a matter of faith, therefore not open to rational discussion. Or they may say that they get their beliefs directly from a prophet or from the Quran or the Bible, meaning again that these beliefs or the way in which they affect their lives are not open to discussion. In this situation, we're going to have a breakdown of communication and ability to compromise. Perhaps this has been one of the fundamental problems throughout history of how religion can exist in a secular world. Personally, I see myself as a secular thinker, so using ideas of rationality, philosophy, science to find what seems to be the right method or the right way to behave, rather than a spiritual belief. I think the success of science and philosophy in creating and influencing the modern world is a testament to the value of rational thinking as opposed to religious thinking. In the past, scientists had much adversity from religion, because often religious leaders saw scientists as blasphemous, B-L-A-S-P-H-E-M-O-U-S, in other words, attacking God. But as science showed more and more success in creating new technology and controlling the physical world, religion has lost its power, and personally I think this is a very good thing. I think secular thinking is the way people should approach problems in the real world. Okay, thank you for listening. Bye bye.